Welcome to the Openhearted Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open-Hearted Podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined by my main man, Photon John. Kev, what's going on, brother?
I am currently sitting in my brother's library/brewery. It's
cool. Okay. I was wondering what that was. I was like, man, I haven't seen that before, but that's a pretty cool background, man.
Yeah. Just down visiting my brother and seeing his wife and my little niece and nephew. It's fun.
Nice. Whereabouts do they live?
On the Gold Coast.
Gold Coast, living it up. Going for a bit of a surf later, mate.
No,
not your thing.
Not this pasty goth face. No.
Yeah, cool, man. Cool. Oh, living the dream. It's Friday. I'm excited to be on the podcast. I've already been on a podcast today. I got up early this morning and did another podcast with a friend of mine. So that was really cool. Been doing a little bit of business, no rest for the wicked. But some really cool stuff, So really cool stuff. But you know what? Nothing as cool as the person we've got coming on today. Kev, did you want to maybe share a little bit about our guests for the day here and before we bring them up on stage?
Yeah, so anyone who's watched before may have seen the episode with our friends Grant and Allison. But today we have Dr. Heather Nuske, who is Allison's sister. She's a research assistant professor at the Penn Center for Mental Health, and that's in the University of Pennsylvania. So hence the Queensland podcast, the 1 o'clock down your way, and I believe 10 o'clock at night over Heather's way.
Yes, definitely has thrown us out. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks so much for inviting me. Great to be here.
No, look, we're so excited to have you on. When Kev reached out and said, "Look, we've got to get Heather on." When he and to tell you the truth, I didn't even realize. Sorry, what's your sister's name again?
Allison.
Allison, yeah. I didn't even realize that Allison had a sister doing the work that you're doing. So I was just like, oh my God, this would be really cool to come on, share some really awesome stuff. And more than anything, just have a really cool chat. I think the funniest thing was before we went on live here, we just got so in depth in this conversation. And I'm like, okay, we better save this. So Heather, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Kev, you're going to look after this one today, mate? Did you want to rock it through?
Yeah, cool. So Heather, just for viewers, do you want to just give us a little background on your family and your upbringing and sort of what brought you to where you are?
Sure. So you've already heard about my sister, Allison. I'm from a large family. I'm one of 6 children. I'm living in the U.S., but everyone else is in Australia and Queensland. My wonderful younger brother, Joe, has autism. He's on the autism spectrum. He has been such a blessing to have in our lives. I've learned so much from him and, about how difference is and how to view the world from another person's point of view that doesn't see it the same as you. So my brother, he was diagnosed late for these days. Usually, kids are diagnosed around 3 or so, but he is 36 now, and he was diagnosed when he was 6. My mom was a teacher and sort of knew something was different about him, but back then, it was really hard for to get any sort of support and give any kind of guidance as to where to go with a child who is different or having some early struggles at school, socially, and academically. And so he throughout his schooling had some difficulties developing friendships and having some early relationships with girls when he was sort of into his high school years. And he saw the world from a different point of view. So he would sometimes say, he had a girlfriend at some point, and he wanted to share how excited he was about having 2 girlfriends. So he told the first girlfriend that, he had another girlfriend, and the first girlfriend was not happy about that.
Yeah, I reckon that wouldn't have gone down too well.
No, and so she broke up with him. But since he is on the spectrum, he didn't really understand what was going on, and that was difficult for him to process. And and now he's 36. He's living independently with support. He has a team of support workers who help him day to day, doing things like doing the grocery shopping, making sure his house is all clean and livable and everything. And overall, he's living a pretty comfortable life, and he's definitely seeking more of a romantic partner. He's had a recent breakup a few months back, looking to reach more friends and that kind of thing. His circle, he's always looking to expand his circle. But yeah, overall doing pretty well. And yeah, so my niece also, or nephew now actually, she had transitioned her identity, a little while ago, and he is now living with having a new identity as a male, and we're all as a family, very supportive and really open to that difference. We have also an older sister, half sister, who is gay, and in that way, I guess it depends on how we're thinking about neurodiversity and where that sort of starts and stops.
Cool. Well, it sounds like you've got some, especially from the family's perspective and all that, it sounds so great that there is that support and understanding there, and it would make it so much easier for a person to be in these environments to really be themselves, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that really makes a difference. The family is accepting and really supportive. Like having the right family network is just such a blessing for somebody who is neurodistinct or neurodiverse, because their families, their comfort, and really making sure that the person feels like they can be themselves is really important.
Very, very, very important. Speaking of late diagnosis, Will and I both only got diagnosed this year. We've been aware for a long time, but the official on paper diagnoses. I do know growing up, and it wasn't anyone's fault. We just it wasn't as understood as it is now, particularly autism in the 80s when I was a little child. So it was tough sort of not having that support network, not because no one cared, but just because no one knew, you know what I mean? So very happy to hear that the family members had that environment. So is this sort of the way that you found your way into the field that you're now in? Do you want to just explain a little background on what you're currently doing for work?
Sure. Yeah. And actually you brought up a good point, that some people, do have a very, late diagnosis, and certainly, even though a lot of people get, into the system, into sort of the diagnostic system early these days, certainly there are people that even still nowadays might get diagnosed, into their 20s or 30s or 40s even sometimes. But yeah, in terms of my entry into the field, so I do research on autism with developmental and experimental training. So my PhD was in experimental and developmental psychology. So basically that meant that I was studying processes and development over time in children on the autism spectrum. And, obviously my brother was a big reason why I wanted to look at autism and find out how best to support children.
Can I say, just sorry to cut you off there, but obviously going into the research that you're doing, especially around children and all that, growing up in the family that you grew up in with your brother and all that, has it made the research more, say, familiar for you, where you're able to see certain things and go, wow, that's interesting. I want to look more in depth into that type of thing? I don't know. Has it helped almost?
I think in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. And I'll explain what I mean.
Yeah, cool.
So in some ways, yeah, I feel like I know my brother so well that I knew the kind of difficulties he was having in terms of processing other people's social cues. Sometimes he would just miss somebody's emotional expression or not really understand what they meant by what they said. He often had difficulties like processing sarcasm, for example, because if you're just listening to the words, the meaning is not there. The meaning is in the tone. The meaning is in the way someone says something, right? And so he will often get confused about that kind of thing. And so I think from that point of view, that helped me to think through my early questions about how does somebody on the spectrum process emotions, react to other people's emotions? Do they need more time and support for processing emotions? Does familiarity help with processing emotions? So some of my very early work, I looked to see if kids on the spectrum were reacting to their teachers in a different way from reacting to people that they don't know, with the idea that maybe they need to have sort of more familiarity with somebody to really crack the code and like understand what they're feeling. And that's actually what we did find in that early work. So that kind of helped me to think through questions in a more, I guess, intuitive way from knowing Joe.
Can I say, just in regards to you were saying that familiarity, you know the word I'm trying to say. So obviously, say school, for example, each year you're changing teachers and all that. Is that a big problem for, say, someone on the spectrum?
Well, change is often difficult for people on the spectrum for many different reasons. Mostly, I'm saying things in terms of like blanket statements about people on the spectrum, but of course, there's so much individual variance here. But generally speaking, people on the spectrum like things to be sort of organized and structured and scheduled. And so
Kevin's definitely like that.
Yeah.
It's like when we have meetings and they have to be changed. It's not a problem, but it's like, look, I've just got to find out if Kevin's cool with that before like changing things. And a lot of the time, me being ADHD, I've got all these out there ideas and love pushing it out there where Kevin's like, hey, hang on, we just got to bring that in. But that works really well. Do you know what I mean?
The dynamic between you two, must be really helpful and synergistic as well.
It is. And it actually helps me being with someone like Kevin because he teaches me a lot about autism. I do a lot of stuff in the neurodiversity space, but I really don't know unless Kevin's brings so much light to it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and definitely like kids on the spectrum at school, for example, they might get upset if the schedule changes for the day, if there's a different teacher or if something gets switched around or they have to leave early or something like that happens. And certainly transitions can be really challenging because of that. We transition to a new school, transition to a new house or a new a new person comes into the house or a new pet or whatever. Transitions can be a challenge. And so so that is sort of, I think, has helped me having a brother on the spectrum. I also worked as a therapist for 7 years with children and adolescents with autism. Back when I was living in Melbourne. And so I would understand things from their eyes as well, from the younger perspective. Because of course, when I was young, my brother was young too. And so I learned to appreciate him. And then I learned about what autism is and the the spectrum, the variety of presentations in autism. And I think that's where it gets a little like maybe not as helpful at the beginning, because I was not appreciating my autism was very Joe-centric, like my brother-centric. And then I got to appreciate all the many different ways that autism can present and manifest. And that was partially through my therapy work and also through my research as well. I used to work for a few years in an early diagnostic clinic as well. So we would see very young kids at six months. We wouldn't diagnose them, but we would follow them over time up until when they were about 3. And all the different presentations for kids as well. Sometimes we really couldn't say even by 3 whether they were on the spectrum or not. We needed more time, and the squishy cases, we would say. Sometimes it's like not clear, sometimes it's cut and dry, you can kind of see those symptoms early. And some kids just don't present that way. And they may need supports and may not, and so it's following them over time. So I think in both, like it kind of helped and also presented a challenge that I had to work through about understanding about the big spectrum of autism.
Yeah, and I guess sort of on that note, what would be some really standout research you've come across in your work?
So there's so much out there. I in my work I focus on supporting emotional development in children, and so work in that area really has struck me and really pulled me in to focus on that. As I was saying before, my very early work was about reacting to emotions and processing emotions. But then I got to realize through some research that I saw, I think it was back in 2014 or 2015, I went to the International Society for Autism Research Conference, which is a yearly conference, which is a US-based conference, but goes all over the world. At that time, it was in Atlanta, and I saw a presentation by Carla Mazevsky, who I hadn't heard of before. She was talking about the importance of emotion regulation in autism, and I found that was just life-changing, career-changing for me, because what I was seeing in the kids about reacting to emotions, processing other people's emotions, that is important, and I think there's a place for that research. But what I was seeing in the diagnostic clinic and in my therapy work was that although those difficulties with processing other people's emotions was impacting them, really more of what was impacting them is their own ability to regulate their own emotions. And that it's just it's so powerful when you're able to regulate your own emotions. And Carla was talking about this in the work that she presented. You're able to really protect yourself from adverse outcomes, that are associated with difficulties with regulating emotions. So internalizing symptoms like anxiety and depression, externalizing symptoms like aggression and self-injury, outward expression of negative emotion. And we know from like typical development that emotion regulation not only protects the person in the years to come, but also across the lifespan. So kids that are able to regulate their emotion more, they do better 20 years down the track, in terms of like career outcomes, in terms of like friendship outcomes, relationship outcomes, all kinds of outcomes. So that for me was really life-changing. And that put me on a different path in terms of my research. And since then, I have been more focusing on, how can we bring in supports for children to help them develop emotion regulation skills. And I bring in more of like a developmental lens on that, because, of course, you don't just regulate emotion without processing your own emotions. So a part of the process to keep yourself in check and to regulate and manage your emotions is to understand what you're feeling and what to do about it. And so the work that I focus on now is really helping the individual and also those around them, like their parents or teachers. I'm focusing on the younger years, how to recognize, when somebody's in a state of distress or stress, um, and bring in support so that the child then learns what to do about their own emotions through, help from their teacher and from their parent. And so we've done that, through lots of different ways in terms of like teaching them to label their own emotions. We're also using physiology, so heart rate tracking, so that we can help to have an extra indicator into the person's emotion as well. And then building in strategies like coping skills, using mindfulness techniques, using relaxation techniques, using distraction or cognitive reappraisal. So seeing a situation that might be stressful and then reappraising it so that, you can see that maybe it's not so stressful. Maybe it's not such a big deal. And
I do wish I'd had that intervention at a young age, because I'm having a bit of a mind blow moment while you're speaking, because it kind of just hit me then that really has been my main problem, is coping with emotions over the years. And my young nephew right now is going through this emotional development. Me and my brother were talking yesterday about it. He's starting to learn how to regulate his emotions and take a step back and think before he emotionally reacts to things. So it's something I may need to bring up working on with my specialist therapist. But I do know I did feel really at the mercy of my emotions growing up, and my emotions didn't happen the way that they did for everyone else. And so, everyone just thought I was very odd. And so that's fantastic. Yeah, the penny just dropped while you were talking. I was like, yep, that's it. That's been the struggle of my life,
And it's so common, like especially with kids who, if they don't have people around them that appreciate that the way that they express emotion is different, that they might just see their behavior as like bad behavior, or they keep acting out. They don't understand the reason why.
They attach neurotypical motivations to behavior that isn't neurotypical, and that can lead to wrong conclusions about the reasons for the behavior. Or
can I say something on that in regards to behavior type of thing, right? Like, obviously I'm not autistic, but in regards to behavior, I remember as a kid getting like, just doing normal stuff to what was normal to me. And then all of a sudden I'd have someone, chasing me with a belt, wanting to belt me, because back in those days that was common, right? But and I'd be thinking, what am I getting in trouble for? Do you know what I mean? And then getting punished. And it was almost like really hard to comprehend, because I'm thinking, what have I done? I'm getting the strap or whatever for doing something I have no idea I'm getting in trouble for. And it was the same in school. I would just be me, and then all of a sudden I'm getting in trouble for stuff, and I'm thinking, what have I done wrong here? And it is so confusing, and I'm assuming it's something similar along those lines, right?
Yeah, and the issue with using discipline or corrective behavior, when the child doesn't quite understand what he should have or she should have been doing in that moment, doesn't really help, because the next time.
Well, I kept getting the strap because I didn't I had no idea what I was doing was wrong a lot of the time.
Right.
I wouldn't learn, where people, I'm assuming you're getting the strap so you learn not to do that next time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not very helpful, I guess, for, they're not processing what they did wrong, what they could do next time. They're not associating what they should do in that moment, and all they're getting is that sort of negative attention. And so some kids, that can actually create a loop where like they know that they get attention through that way, and so they're going to do that behavior again. They don't understand the repercussions of what's going on. They're just like doing that behavior, and jumping in, getting the child to like. I'm thinking about children because that's how we work. Where we work, in the school district, like getting them to stop as what is going on with your nephew at the moment, Kev. Stop, think about your behavior, think about what's going to be the next step, so that you're not just reacting to the situation, giving some more awareness to what is going on. So it's not like you see some trigger creates a behavior, but you're stopping and making sure that you have thought about the next move.
Because, I think for me, it made me more rebellious because I was getting in trouble for something I had no idea what I was getting in trouble for, and then I would be, angry and upset. So I was like, well, stop this. I'm going to rebel back. And I would go break something for punishing, you know what I mean? It's like punishment, or I would have, yell back at the teacher or whatever that was, because I had no idea why I was getting in trouble, and it felt like I was getting picked on. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you were the same, Kev.
There's a difference, but I think there's a difference between misbehaving, where it's a conscious misbehaving, and, for lack of a better term, incorrectly behaving. And I think it really would be important in schools for teachers to understand the difference there and how to identify it, because you can't punish. Self-awareness, you were talking about, Heather, is a really big thing, because when you're born with a completely different version of reality, and for a long time to begin with, you're unaware that everyone else's version is different. You're just completely self-unaware about what you're doing or what you might be doing wrong until you learn that awareness and learn that other people are not seeing everything the way that you do. But it's a real shame that kids would be getting punished for not consciously misbehaving. They're not being naughty. They're just
being themselves, really.
Yeah.
It's a missed learning opportunity for everyone there, because the kid might be able to be like, oh, you don't like it when I do that, or they can associate what's going on, but that's just going over because they're not focusing on what they could do, but what they didn't do.
Yeah, right. I used to have a lot of trouble when in class when the teacher's instructions didn't make logical sense to me, and I couldn't make myself approach it in a different way, and so I would fail assignments, or I'm a lifelong musician and art lover, but I failed music miserably. I failed art miserably because they were trying to fit me within these predefined guidelines on what art was or whatever, and I couldn't make it make sense to my brain, and I just wouldn't do it. And so by that logic and that way of teaching, I just failed everything.
But in saying that, right, I would fail a lot of stuff as well, but what would happen is like you said, you'd have certain questions that you'd need to answer, and I didn't know how to answer those questions. So I would I would be afraid to ask, because I knew that if I asked a question, a lot of the time the teacher would have a go at me and say things like, yeah, this is because you're not listening, or you're not paying attention, rah, rah, rah. So as a kid, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to ask a question now, because every time I do, I get in trouble for it. So from a young age, you're thinking, well, it's bad to ask questions. Do you know what I mean? Good kids don't ask questions, little things like that, which I think, and I think because that was from an early age, and I'll actually give you an example. I remember when I was in grade 1, we had to do this little craft activity where do they still have that glue here in Australia? Where you put the brush in and then you paint it onto the page. You remember that glue?
Yeah.
You'd have this little clag, right? And you'd put your brush in, and then you'd paint it on the back of the whatever, and then you'd stick it on.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, and I remember we'd put it onto the piece of paper, and we had to do a number 1. So we'd put one thing there, and then put the sand over, and you blow the sand away, and then the sand stuck to all the glue there, right? And then I remember they said, then we want you to put one picture next to the number 1 to show one picture, right? So I put a picture of this racing car and I was like, oh my God, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a little bear in there because it'll look really cool. And I'm going to tell my teacher because she's going to think that's really awesome. And so I did that. And then I went up and said to the teacher, hey, look what I've done. And oh my God, she like grabbed me by my wrist, hauled me up to the front of the classroom. And she goes, this is grade 1. And she's like, everyone, this is an example of arousing. And then she just went ballistic at me in front of everyone. And I burst into tears. And then I was just like, what's going on? Why am I getting in trouble here? Do you know what I mean?
What was her problem there?
Well, the problem was there was only supposed to be one picture of on there, not two. Because I put the bear in there, that was classed as 2 pictures. But for me, I didn't realize that we were just sticking. Now I do. But at the time, I didn't realize that the instruction was to just put 1 picture. I thought we were just making some nice art and crafts and do you know what I mean? And
it sounds like the teacher's being very rigid in terms of her instruction as well. Like you were being creative, like that was a new approach. Like
totally.
And 1 teddy bear, but they just combined,
Totally. And I think for me, that really tarnished me because obviously I'm sitting here still talking about it. Obviously, it was something I fully remembered, but I think that really, and then I remember like during school, I'd be there not right thinking, what the hell am I supposed to be writing? Tears building up in my eyes because I'm thinking if I ask a question, she's gonna rouse at me. You know what I mean? So I was so worried and almost that tarnished for the rest of my schooling life from that period, if that makes sense. So we can, there are so many steps that could have been avoided that could have maybe have helped me to be a better student during school, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point in terms of individualization, in terms of recognizing difference and the teacher's ability to key into those differences and then use them to the student and to their own advantage. If they had realized that, you're processing it different, you could have had like a check-in moment where they could try to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it that way. Then it could have been something they celebrated with you rather than, shamed you for it. So
yeah, totally. It could have been.
With kids on the spectrum, that happens so frequently. They're just misunderstood, and they're genuinely trying to, do, engage in an activity or trying to understand what is going on. But, some teachers do a really great job at that, and some teachers don't. And some teachers just don't have the right supports around them to do a really good job at that. So we've been learning about that in our work in the Philadelphia School District over here, and it's one of the poorest school districts in the city, in the country. Sorry, it's one of the largest school districts here, and teachers they often just don't have like the physical resources or enough bodies in the classroom, like enough aides or one-to-ones working with the students to really give their best. And so, we've been thinking about how do we bring in some supports that could be helping them to implement the strategies that they are trying to do in the school classroom context, using some digital health types of approaches. So we're thinking about how do we do sorry, I skipped a little bit ahead of
No, all good.
How do we use technology to help key in the teachers about what is best to do in any one given moment. So I have a little scratchy throat at the moment. I just had COVID actually a couple of weeks ago.
Oh no, you're good now.
Yeah, it was like a couple of weeks ago. I tested negative for the first time today.
Good job. Well, you've done well to come here.
Yeah, thank you.
It's okay. I'm really fine. Just have a bit of an itchy throat. So yeah, so using support. So we've been developing different applications that that is keyed into helping teachers recognize when a particular child is having a stress episode or about to have a stress episode, using heart rate tracking in the school context. And then the application that we've developed is called the Keep Calm app. So it's all about bringing in supports to keep the child calm and learning in the classroom, and to try to focus them in so that they're not having side effects of like mental health issues or challenging behaviors. They're able to learn and be ready to to really engage with their peers. So what happens is that the child wears a heart rate tracker, and that's connected with the application that we've developed. And that helps the teacher know where the child is in terms of their levels of stress over time. We're measuring heart rate, so it's not a perfect measure of stress. It's physiological arousal. But in the context of we're also tracking their movement, so we know that they're not just running around, because of course heart rate is increasing when children are running around. And that connects with the strategies that they could use in the classroom. So it also helps them to remind the teachers what to do. And that's very much individualized. So sort of on that topic of like keying into what works best for a particular individual, we know that there's many strategies that will work, like relaxation or mindfulness techniques or distraction, or using positive reinforcement for positive behavior too. So focusing on what the child is doing well, and not giving that attention to behaviors that are not great, like negative peer interaction or like hitting or things like that. So really praising them when they're doing a good job. And so the app knows which strategies are working best for a particular child because it knows the history of heart rate over time. So it knows when the heart rate is reducing after using a strategy. It knows when the teacher says, it has worked or not, the strategy has worked or not in the past, and whether there's any behaviors that are happening after the strategy has been implemented. So it basically gives some smart metrics that helps the teacher know what to do when they're in a situation where the child is stressed. And so that's a bit of the technology work that I've been doing, and other applications that we've been developing.
Just jump in for a second. I'm a big data guy, and you've gotten me very excited about the idea of being able to, I don't know the term, but datafy my emotions. That would be amazing. You can actually review data on the emotional regulation and find out what is and isn't working and triggers. And is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, exactly. We have entry of triggers, behaviors, any skills that the child is working on. It's around their educational program. So children will be working on a number of like cognitive skills or adaptive skills, academic skills. And then quite often they might have a behavior plan of like behaviors that is not very good to have at school, like aggression, or behavior that they're trying to minimize, like elopement or something like that. So the teacher and the educational team decide what those are, and then the app helps you to sort of track those over time and identify patterns of which strategies are working best to help reduce stress and keep kids calm. So,
out of curiosity, have you had? Oh, sorry. Have you had much interest in the development of the app? Is it being used outside of the work that you're doing, or have you shared that with other doctors or people in your field? How is that been taking off?
So it's going pretty well. So far, we've got a little bit of funding to support the work. So I got some pilot funding through a foundation here. Back in 2018, I did some design workshops with teachers, parents, and self-advocates to work out what we wanted to actually include in the application. And then as a part of my Career Development Award, which is funded by the National Institutes of Mental Health, that has given me a 4-year project, which funds my salary for the 4 years and gives some money for the project too. So we have done around 50 interviews with principals, self-advocates, teachers, and parents in the first year. We took all that information about, basically did a needs assessment to work out what are the gaps in terms of like helping kids stay calm and regulate their emotions at school. So we learned a lot from that. We built that into a prototype. We did 2 rounds of testing that prototype using images that we created about the app, and we got feedback on it. We used a program called Figma to create the application designs. And then this was during the pandemic, so we wanted to jump right into schools, but we couldn't for a while. So then we built a prototype. We did 1 round of testing, which was in the spring this last year. And then we're just about to do 2 more rounds of testing. So we're just recruiting right now. And so, yeah, we had a lot of interest from, the National Institutes of Health about this kind of work. We're engaged with our community partners.
Have you heard of an organization called Multiple?
No.
Okay, they could be something interesting for you to get in contact with. So Multiple, and I'm sort of been talking to them a bit. They're like a accelerator program to help people who are developing technology within the autism space or the neurodiversity space.
Yeah.
So they can help with a lot of stuff there. So I might send you some information on them if you're open to it.
Sure.
To potentially get some, some better funding there or more funding if that helps.
Yeah, always welcome more funding, that's for sure.
No, I don't know. Do I want more money? I'm not sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that would be great. Always looking for new industry partners and funding sources. So
can I ask, Heather, have you done much work in the neurodiversity field or had much experience or interaction with neurodiversity outside of autism at all?
Not so much. So my work is definitely focused on autism. I have been working more in the mental health space over the last couple of years. So I did some work with college students with anxiety and depression. We are about to apply for some more funds for another digital health application for adolescents with anxiety. But yeah, not outside really in terms of neurodiversity, like true and proper. Not really outside of that space, more in the mental health space these days.
College students with anxiety, that would be all of them, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think so. And certainly, during the pandemic, those numbers have been rising.
I would say just being alive and young in this day and age would be pretty anxiety inducing.
Yeah, it's true, and, unfortunately, a lot of people that have anxiety and depression, especially during the college years where, they're trying to find themselves and all of that, they just don't seek help and they don't reach out often. So I think digital health has real power there because they may not go to see a therapist, but they might download an app and start to use that.
And it starts that conversation at least, and I think as well, especially younger people in school and all that. Like I spoke about when I left school, I had no idea what I was doing. I was afraid to ask for help a lot of the time. So this is where sometimes our schooling years can sometimes be what's the word I'm looking for? Really bad on us to want to do what we need to do a lot of the time out of being afraid or no one else is doing that or how people might view us for asking those questions.
Right. And for a large proportion of people with internalizing kind of symptoms, they don't realize that other people are experiencing that too. They think it's like only themselves and they don't really know where to even begin to ask for help. So having more resources online and available in applications where they can maybe connect with other people that are also going through this, but not as in a scary way, more in a safe space, right? They're connected.
Well, it's actually really interesting because, I struggle with mental health and there's been a few times where I've gone to like actual not like AA, but like it's like a mental health groups where we sit around and we it's a open area to actually share what you're sort of going through, how you're feeling. And I tell you what, it is actually really helpful being in that circle and hearing how other people or what other people are going through. Like it could be breakups or, and I know a lot of people think, well, if you're in a breakup, you'll get over it type of thing. But that can be a hard period because you're so lost. You're so used to being with a person at that point. So it is helpful when you do know other people who are going through the same thing. And if we think about neurodiversity, for example, I was only speaking to a lady the other day who she acquired neurodiversity from a brain injury and everything. So, and she's also physically disabled as well. So, for her, she felt so alone. And Kevin, you may have felt this as well for a long time. You do feel so alone. And once you start finding your tribe or hearing more about people exactly like you, it changes your mindset and you feel more comfortable being open about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I've learned so much and come so far since, we've begun doing this podcast, and Will and I have been friends for a long time, but we really sort of started having conversations around neurodiversity relatively in recent years, and it really does help. And I do love that that aha moment when the diagnosis comes in, or when you realize, I remember, and you just suddenly you look back and your entire life makes sense. And
that's why I was staring out the window all those times.
Yeah, it is really comforting, and really it has changed my life a lot, just having that realization.
Yeah, definitely. I think it can give some sort of sense of closure too, right? And that from adults having like a later diagnosis, that like, oh, okay, now I can see why all this was happening. Like I understand, what is going on with me. And then there's like an opportunity, as you said, to connect with like-minded folks, and that can give you even more sense of like community. And
it's really interesting because I now look back to a lot of the people I went to school with, and I'm sort of like, yeah, man, that dude was that, or this dude was, or girl was this and that. And we've connected now since, social media and all that. And yeah, it's just like we have lived, we're different people, but live such a similar type of life type of thing. But there is that aha moment. It's like, but we feel like we just connect. Do you know what I mean? And it feels like your tribe, and you can sort of bring down that wall and be yourself type of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful thing. I think that's what I'd love for, for all the individuals that I work with on the spectrum, to be able to do that and to be able to connect, in a meaningful way once they've developed their identity. Of course, when we're working with kids, they don't really have a sense of what being autistic or being on the spectrum or having autism, depending on the language you
want to put it,
what that means to them, and some people may not develop that. Like my brother, he in terms of his support needs, like he is probably in the middle. Like he is able to live independently with support, but in terms of his understanding about his autism, still now he'll ask me like, so what is autism again? He won't quite understand that is what he has. Like he finds it hard to kind of pull himself out of his body and think about him, in the third person, about this person who has a thing called autism. Different from the other people. I think cognitively he hasn't really represented that. And so I don't think he identifies as being autistic in the same way as somebody else who...
I'm assuming it would just be normal. it would just be normal for him. He's just living a normal life. Am I right?
I think he
wouldn't know any different.
I think he recognizes in some way that he's different, but I'm not sure if he has really understood in reading about autism,
Okay.
what autism really is. He wouldn't really seek out written material in that way anyway. He would be more likely to ask like one of his family members or friends. But yeah, I don't think he has like a fully developed sense of self in that way. But I think it's and he knows that he is different, and he has connected with like-minded different people. But I think in a different way. So he's been he does like day programs where he'll do like day support kind of activities with other people that are in some way neurodiverse, have some sort of either disability or that they need support during the day, and that has really allowed him to widen his social network. And he is very interested in using like online ways to do that as well. But then he's come across some safety kind of issues too, and that opens up a whole nother world, of what's appropriate to put on social media and what's not appropriate to put on social media. Like how, because he doesn't have that outset mindset of like, maybe this is something that I like, but my family and friends may not like, things like that. He doesn't really have that awareness of like, let's maybe not do that. Because he likes it. Like he's enjoying it. He likes it. He's a very pure thinker in that way. Like he acts on what he loves about the world, and he in many different ways. And it's beautiful in a sense. He's like very pure.
Yeah, and it's quite common. My sister is autistic as well, and she just has that 100% honesty.
Yeah.
So, when honesty is not always the best policy, but you'll get it from her no matter what. But it's beautiful the way that you just know exactly what she's thinking. Particularly, I guess, for me being autistic, I don't have to wonder. That relationship is not difficult. It's quite easy.
I think the confusing thing for me with autism is that it is so diverse, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? You couldn't say an autistic person is this, because it is so diverse within itself. Do you know what I mean? Like you may have some people who, need this constant help and support, and then there's other people who are completely different, who live normal everyday lives, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I'm very high on the spectrum, which a lot of people find. I found it hard to believe when I got my diagnosis, but I think partially it was years of not being diagnosed and sort of learning to cope with things in certain ways. But I know other people who are lower on the spectrum who are lower functioning in terms of their day-to-day lives. So I don't know. Are you able to elucidate that at all, Heather? What's happening there? Do you know?
Well, there's a history on this. So when we used to diagnose autism back in 2000, the DSM-4, we're up to DSM-5 right now. DSM-4 was, in a sense, more open, because you could have like, there used to be Asperger's. You might have heard of that term. Well, of course you would have. So the Asperger's term was really, in terms of the symptoms, were far fewer that you would have to have. These days, I've known you for very long now, but it seems like from what you've said about your own life and presentation, that's probably what would have been diagnosed if it was back then. But when you're so the spectrum went from that to autistic disorder, which is more like classical autism, and then other pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS. That one was very, like, you didn't have to have many symptoms really at all to be able to get that category. And so what happened was that the spectrum became much wider. Many more people were getting diagnosed as being on the pervasive developmental disorder spectrum. And then over time, because people who were, that had autism or that was on the autism spectrum, they, and because we're also getting better in terms of supporting individuals, they were then growing up, meeting, their partners and having kids as well. And so because we know that there's a genetic link, they're more likely to have kids on the spectrum themselves. And so there was sort of in a sense, a widening of the spectrum because of the diagnostic criteria, better supports out there so that more people were out there and, and then also having kids, who were also on the spectrum. And then we had some societal changes too, more awareness of autism, more detection of autism, earlier detection. So there's just, that ended up having such a wide net. And then over the last couple of years, since the last DSM-5 criteria that we have now, which is more strict, it's gone back the other way, but there's already so many people that have that diagnosis and that are out there in the community, and so we have these kind of different fractions in a sense forming, and so there is the higher functioning or that kind of term actually is not used so much in terms of research these days, but people who don't need as much support, so that are able to live an independent life, are able to work and engage with the community and all of that. So they are a side of the spectrum that has really gained a lot of momentum in terms of building confidence, getting into legislation and helping to self-advocate for more research that is not about us but with us. That there's really much more of a voice of that side of the spectrum, which is really great. And so much has come from that has been really positive.
Can I just ask on the genetics side of things? Is that certain? Yeah. Do we know that now?
We do know that. We do know that there's that autism is hereditary, so it runs in family lines. There is no known cause genetically. There's not one gene or one set of genes or one cluster of genes that is implicated in autism. That's a confusing part of it. There's many pathways to autism. So you don't, like the genes that have been implicated in autism have also been implicated in a lot of other mental health type of disorders like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. Not to say that, there's clear, distinct differences between the diagnoses and the symptoms of those different disorders, but on the genetic level, there's not a clear pathway from genes to autism. There are a lot of factors out there in the environment. Some are about environmental toxins. Some are about the pregnancy-related factors. So if you have, for example, a fever in the third trimester, you're more likely to have a child who has not only autism, but depression, anxiety, other things like that. There's a link there. We know that if you have an older parent or father or mother, that there's more of a chance that the child would have autism. If the two pregnancies of a mother is too close together or too far apart, that's more associated with factors of autism. There's so many of these modifiable risk factors, but that is, there's just, it's so complex. So there's not one thing. We've given up on trying to find the one thing that causes autism because it just does not match with the data that has been found. And all the really well-funded genetics work has not identified anything that can just come down to one chromosome or one gene.
My family is always known, I guess, because my mum, myself, my nephew, my cousin, my sister. It's pretty prevalent in our family. My auntie as well. So but yeah. Anyway, we're coming up on time. So I did just have one last question, which was, what do you think is going to happen over the next 10 years with regards to neurodiversity? I guess, and in your field in particular, to do with autism. Where do you see us being 10 years from now on it?
Yeah, I hope that I was sort of alluding to this before, but the diversity across the spectrum, I really hope that we continue to gain a recognition and an awareness of the wonderful things that autism can bring across the spectrum, including people who have many skills and are able to advocate for themselves, and also continue to recognize the support needs that are needed with kids who have more significant day-to-day kind of issues that need to be addressed. So I love that we're gaining more traction in terms of the neurodiversity movement and people getting understanding all the great things that can come with having a difference of mind and those skills and the features of autism that can be really quite beneficial in relationships, honesty, all we're talking about, all of the genuine nature that people have who are on the spectrum, which is really a beautiful thing. But I think what's getting lost a little bit is the support needs. So we don't want to advocate too far, for some neurodiversity advocates will say, hey, I don't want to treat autism. We shouldn't treat autism. And I think that that's dangerous because, of course, if your experience is that your autism is shown has impacted you throughout your life, but ultimately you're able to live a healthy, happy, independent life, that's very different from someone who never learned how to toilet or never doesn't know how to use words or is not being able to express themselves verbally or through other communication channels who need 24/7 support. So I think it's really important to recognize that is an ongoing need, and profound autism really does need support. And so I think that we just need to keep that in mind, that
and it's
all parts of the spectrum.
Totally. And I think that goes with even other neurodiversities, like dyslexia can be so much different in some people compared to others. Same with ADHD, so there's some people who do need that support where some others may be fine without that support but still struggle with some things. If so, yeah, totally. I'm 100% behind you on that.
It can be subtle too, there's an in-between. I mean, for me personally, yes, I'm high functioning, but the reason I got my diagnosis this year was because emotionally, after, 40 odd years, without learning any real tools on how to cope with my own emotions, I was a mess. I was really not coping with life, and I knew that I needed help. I needed diagnosis, and so it didn't matter that I was high functioning. The accumulative strain of dealing with emotions and going through endless cycles of autistic burnout and depression was really killing me. So it definitely needed treatment for that.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sorry that you experienced that. And it's such unfortunately a common experience having that burnout and experiencing depression, anxiety. I think getting help is definitely not limited to needing support is not limited to the lower end of the spectrum in terms of functional skills, adaptive skills. Certainly, across the spectrum, mental health challenges and all of that. I think that recognizing the strength and also the support needs is really important, and it needs to stay at the forefront of like legislation and policy advocacy too, because that is what's going to help change things. And, Australia's in a pretty good place right now with NDIS and, being able to support individuals that way. I think there's still obviously could go further in supporting mental health in particular. 5 sessions a year or 10 sessions a year may not be enough, for many people. So, I think there's still a ways to go. And I think, we need to just balance that when we're talking about, about autism and all the spectrum. Like, we want people to recognize the wonderful strengths that come from autism. But we also want to keep the focus on the support needs, because if we don't, then we're not going to have that change that we need in terms of policy that will help to get the support that everyone, that people need.
Totally. Awesome. Well, look, I don't think we have too much else to go over. Photon, John, what do you reckon, my man?
I think we are pretty good, unless there's anything else you wanted to close off with, Heather?
Yeah, was there anything you wanted to plug or anything like that?
If anyone wants to find out more about the Keep Calm app that I was talking about before, my website is digitalmentalhealth.org/keepcalm. So digitalmentalhealth.org has all of our work that we're doing across lots of different projects relating to digital mental health, including the Keep Calm app. So look me up there.
And so it's best for your website. Are you on LinkedIn or anything like that?
I'm on LinkedIn, although I haven't updated my profile in quite some time. I'm on ResearchGate, probably a little bit.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, Kev, you're happy with that, my man?
I am. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, Heather, it's been so fantastic having you on board, and especially sharing that research side of things that you're doing. I think, there can never be enough, that we need more of it. There's so many areas, especially, autism or dyslexia or whatever it's been. There's so much more research needed to be done. But thank you so much for coming on board and sharing and staying up late and, speaking with us today, especially since getting over COVID. I hope we haven't taken too much air out of those lungs for you.
No, I'm doing good. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be on here. And
thank you so much. But we look forward to actually sharing some other things as soon as we get off here. But besides that, thank you so much. For anyone listening, please follow our social media platforms, connect, subscribe, like. My name's Will Wheeler. I'm with my main man, Photon John, and you're listening to the Openhearted Podcast. Till next time.